Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, August the 12th. And welcome to our commentary. Well, nothing really new from Texas today, meaning our little episode with the missing Democrats. Nothing really new. I guess they decided to open a new session today or start the session and they couldn't get a quorum, so they had to postpone it, I guess, until tomorrow. The governor did say today that he'll start a new session on Friday, which means you'll get the ball rolling one more time on Friday if they don't come back by then. So this is going to go on for a while, I guess. Probably not as long as people think, because eventually they're going to run out of money, as I've said before, and they're also going to run out of patience. And I think the voters, the sense I get is that most of the voters are fed up with it. And what they're saying is, look, come home and make your case here. Go to the legislative session or go to the Capitol, make your case, talk to the media here locally. I mean, what's fascinating to me is these people are talking to a bunch of media around the country, appearing in all kinds of podcasts and all kinds of shows that I don't think a lot of people are watching in Texas. I mean, if you want to come down here and talk to the local news here or to the local stations, that makes a lot more sense. Or maybe go to some local radio in Texas. That makes a lot more sense to me as far as persuading people and reaching them. But anyway, so that's where we are. There may be a new session on Friday. The governor will start a new session, and then we'll play the game all over again, start the game all over again. In the meantime, there is some serious business that is not being done. And that is that we got to get these budgets or these programs approved to help the victims of these floods in South Texas. And primarily what they need to get done is to pay for these sirens and alarms that they want to set up on the river, so that people, if you're on the river on vacation or retreat or whatever, and you don't have internet connection, maybe there's a way of still letting you know that the floods are coming. So that is being delayed, and that's a shame. That's a shame, because that is really important. That is really important. And I think some people are starting to talk about that too, which is fascinating. The other thing that I wanted to say, I have a post at the American Thinker a couple of days ago where I talk about how the governor has really changed the conversation nationwide. Instead of talking about the Texas map, we're talking about the Illinois map, the California map. We're talking about Massachusetts. We're talking about Maryland, New York. So the governor, in a very, I don't know if he meant to do this, but this is what's happened. He has changed the conversation in the country. So instead of just talking about the Texas maps, we're talking about the Illinois map. And if you want to see a crazy map, if you really want to see a crazy map, check out the map from Illinois. That is crazy. That map is crazy. That map is Exhibit A in gerrymandering. That's all I can tell you. That's Exhibit A in gerrymandering, that particular map. Well, I have another post at American Thinker today, and this is kind of a fun one. I got out of the political conversation for a day and wanted to talk about the 52nd anniversary of the movie American Graffiti. Now, as I write in my post, this was supposed to be one of these summer movies. I don't know if they still make them now, but for a long time, they used to make these summer movies because all these kids were home from school and they needed to go out somewhere. And so they made these movies so that the kids could go to these movies. And American Graffiti was kind of those movies, one of them. And it had a low budget and, the usual summer movie situation. But then it exploded and it became one of the biggest movies of all time. And my friend George Rodriguez was telling me in yesterday's podcast that American Graffiti is now considered one of the top 100 movies in the American cinema. I didn't know that. That's a pretty good standing, I would think. So anyway, the movie became a huge success. I mean, a huge success. And they made a lot of money. They sold a lot of tickets. So I was thinking about why it became a success and why it was so popular, even though nobody expected it. And I came to the conclusion that it's because the movie was extremely real. The people in the movie were people you could relate to. If you went to high school in the early 60s, now that was not my case. I went to high school a little bit later than that, a little bit later than that. But anyway, if you went to high school in the early 60s, and there were lots of people 53 years ago that obviously fitted that profile, probably still today, that you could relate to that movie so much. You had this young couple in the movie who went to a special dance and were dancing to the Platters, smoke gets in your eyes. That's something you can relate to if you went to high school in the early 60s. And then you had all these rowdy boys doing the kinds of things that high school kids used to do in the summer. And then you had these really attractive girls. And so the whole thing was like something everybody could relate to. Everybody could relate to. And I think that's the reason that the movie was so successful, because it was very real and everybody had a favorite character in the movie. Everybody could look at one of those characters and relate to them. And I think that's why it became such a success and why it made as much money as I did, because everybody sort of, you had somebody in the movie that you could relate to. And I think that's the reason that it became such a hit, American Graffiti. So anyway, I talk about that in the American Thinker article that I have today. It's over at americanthinker.com. Check it out. Usually on the right-hand side is where they put my posts. Well, all the Democrats are going crazy with President Trump's decision to intervene in Washington, D.C., to send the National Guard, basically, or at least take over the police. They're going crazy because they're telling us that the statistics don't support doing that, because apparently there's no crime. It's all been going down. Everything is great in Washington, D.C. Well, of course, everything is not great. The crime is a problem. The unease that people live under is a problem. It is not a safe city. It is not a safe place. And it is the capital of the United States. This is where people, when they come here, the tourists come here, that's where they go. And I remember going there a couple of times, and I loved going to Washington, D.C., the monuments, all the history. I really got a kick out of that. And a lot of people do come to the United States, or not only that, but many Americans go to Washington, D.C. to see the country's history. But the city is not safe. The carjackings are a problem, the assault, the shooting. I mean, we saw the other night one of these scenes of all these kids running around creating problems. They clearly do have a juvenile crime problem. That is true. That is true. And something has to be done about all these 14 and 15-year-old and 16-year-old kids running around. I mean, where in the hell are their parents? I mean, that's what I don't get. Where are their parents? How do you have these kids running around like that? Where are their parents? But I guess that's another topic. But the reality is that the Democrats always oppose Trump. Anytime he does anything, they have to go against him. If he says yes, they have to say no. So anything that he does, they oppose. This time, though, I think they're hurting themselves, because when you've got the police union coming out saying that they support what the president's actions are, and I would think most people in Washington, D.C., who actually live under that situation there, they probably support it as well. So the Democrats always have to go against Trump, because they always have to go against Trump, because going against Trump is what you do these days if you're a Democrat. They're just shooting themselves. What they should do, it would be a heck of a lot smarter, if instead of going against Trump, they would pick their topics and they would say, you know what? Trump has an idea here. Trump has a point here. There's too much crime in D.C. Let's work with him and let's fix the problem, because everybody wins if you fix the D.C. problem. D.C. wins, the country wins. But no, they have to oppose him and oppose him and oppose him and oppose him. And I think it ends up hurting the Democrats. I mean, when you see these polls that come out showing that the country doesn't have a high opinion of the Democrats, I think a lot of it is this irrational opposition to Trump. Trump says yes, and they have to say no. Regardless of the topic, Trump says yes, they have to say no. And I think It's not leadership. I mean, it's not even rational behavior to behave in that fashion. So it would be a lot smarter if the Democrats would say to Trump, you know what? You're right about DC. We do need to do something about it. Let's do something about it. And let's do something about it. Everybody will win, and the Democrats would get some credit for it, especially the Democrat leadership there in Washington, D.C. Well, let's go back today. Let me leave you today with, on this day in history, 1961. It was on this day that they started the Berlin Wall, I guess, or they finished what came to be known as the Berlin Wall. And by the way, I think a few days later, they had the first casualty. But the Berlin Wall was something that my generation grew up with. I mean, everybody would hear the word, the Berlin Wall. And of course, it was a wall separating East and West Berlin. That's what it was. And everybody in my generation heard about it, related to it. Eventually, of course, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the wall came down. And now it's been, what, 20, almost 30 years, hasn't it been? Yeah, more than that, since that wall went down. And I remember one time writing a post saying that I hope we never stop teaching kids about the Berlin Wall and what it really meant. It wasn't just a wall. It was a wall separating people running away from communism and seeking freedom in the West. And that's what it was. But it all started on this day in 1961 when I'm not sure if it was East Germany or the Soviet Union or maybe the same thing, decided to build a wall because too many people were crossing into West Berlin, escaping Berlin, or East Berlin at the time. So we remember the Berlin Wall and how much that meant to all of us growing up in that generation. And then when it went down, I remember when it went down and all the shows on TV about the collapse of the Berlin Wall. I remember all of that. And I think for a lot of us, it was very emotional because we had grown up with the Berlin Wall as a big part of our growing up years. Anyway, thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. Check out our interview with my good friend George Rodriguez. It's the one before this video. Check out that, and we'll talk to you later. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.